The total arrears come to $48,712, Patrick, my granddaughter Samantha said, her voice echoing in the narrow hallway. The new building manager, a man half my age with a slick, unsympathetic smile, stood beside her, holding a clipboard like a weapon. The air was thick with the Friday evening smell of my neighbor's cooking, a scent that had meant home for 40 years, but now felt like a funeral wreath. Her words hung there, cold and precise, for all to hear. A nervous titter escaped the manager. Samantha didn't laugh, but her lips curled into a smirk of pure victory. It's a simple matter of non-payment, Grandpa. The numbers don't lie. She gestured to the stark white eviction notice taped to my apartment door. Its bold black letters a final public declaration of my failure. It was done. She had won. I had lost everything. The hallway suddenly felt airless, the walls closing in on me. Mrs. Gable from 4B cracked her door open, her eyes wide with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The manager tapped the sheet on his clipboard. Per the notice, you have until the 30th to vacate the premises. The sum, $48,712, was circled in red ink, a bloody wound on the page. I was a spectacle. The old man who couldn't pay his rent, cornered in the very hallway where I greeted neighbors and carried groceries for 4 decades. But I didn't tremble. I didn't rage. I simply stood there, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in front of me. I looked from the notice to Samantha's triumphant face and offered a small, quiet smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was a smile that held the secret, a piece of the story she had so carelessly overlooked. She saw an old man giving up. She had no idea I was watching the carefully laid trap begin to close. I drew a slow, steadying breath, preparing to deliver the line I had rehearsed in my mind for weeks. The manager shifted his weight, impatient. Samantha's smirk tightened, ready for my final plea. The entire building seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the old man to break. I opened my mouth to speak, but months earlier, it all began not with a bang, but with a crisp, cream-colored envelope slid under my door. The apartment was quiet that Tuesday afternoon, filled with the comfortable silence of my life with Rose. The sun slanted through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing over my worn leather armchair. Her scent, a faint trace of lavender and old books, still clung to the cushions. The envelope had no return address, just a corporate logo I didn't recognize. Inside, a letter informed me that the building had been sold to a new property management LLC. My rent, it stated, was now past due. Samantha arrived that weekend, not with a pie like she used to, but with a slim, leather portfolio and an air of professional detachment. "Grandpa, we need to talk about the building," she said, avoiding my eyes. She sat on the edge of the sofa, a place where I'd once bounced her on my knee, telling her stories about my union days. I remembered her small hand clutching my finger, her wide eyes full of trust. That memory was a sharp, painful sting against her cold tone now. I tried to explain my payment history. "I've paid my rent in cash, same day every month, for 40 years, Sammy. Old Mr. Henderson and I had an arrangement." I gestured toward the hall closet. "I've got every receipt, every canceled check from before that, all in a shoebox up there." Samantha sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. "Grandpa, nobody cares about your dusty old junk. It's 2023. There's no digital trail. As far as the new owners are concerned, those payments never happened." The next Friday, the official eviction notice appeared, taped to my door with aggressive, tearing strips of packing tape. It cited chronic non-payment and listed a figure that made my stomach clench: $12,178 in alleged arrears. The number was an invention, a fiction designed to break me. The smell of my neighbor's garlic bread wafted down the hall, a painful reminder of the life, the community, they were trying to rip away from me. This was no longer a mistake. It was an attack. That night, I sat in the dark, clutching a framed photo of Rose. We'd moved into this apartment as newlyweds. "We'll grow old here, Patrick," she'd said, tracing the pattern on the wallpaper. "This will be our castle, our constant." I had promised her I would keep it, that it would be a touchstone for our family. Now her own granddaughter was turning that promise to ash. betraying not just me, but the memory of the woman she was named after. A notice gave me a deadline, a ticking clock that echoed in the silence of the apartment. The eviction hearing in housing court is set for next Friday, October 27th. The date was circled. 10 days. 10 days to undo a lie 40 years in the making. 10 days to find a way to fight a system that was already tilted against me. My union experience taught me one thing: never back down from a fight. But this felt different. This was family. I called Samantha, my hand trembling slightly. I thought if I could just appeal to her, to the girl I knew, she would see reason. Her voice was chillingly calm. "Grandpa, be realistic," she said, her tone businesslike. "The building needs upgrades, and I can't do them with your low rent. I need the apartment back. It's not personal. It's just a necessary step for my investment to be profitable." The justification was so clean, so sterile. It was more brutal than any angry word could have been. My first public humiliation came 2 days later. I was in the lobby collecting my mail when Samantha walked in with the new manager, a man named Mr. Davies. She didn't lower her voice. "As you can see, the building has some long-term tenants," she said, a dismissive wave in my direction. "My grandpa is getting forgetful in his old age, misplacing things, forgetting payments. We're working on finding him a more suitable arrangement." She smiled at him. I was a problem to be managed. Rummaging through my desk that evening, my heart leaped. I found a Christmas card from 2 years ago, from old Mr. Henderson, the previous owner. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on his company letterhead. "Patrick, you're the best tenant a man could ask for. Paid up and perfect for 38 years straight. All the best, Tom." It was proof. It was a lifeline. Here was the truth, written in the hand of the man who had taken my cash payments every month. The next morning, I took the bus to a legal aid clinic, the note clutched in my hand like a winning lottery ticket. A young, tired-looking lawyer glanced at it. "This is nice," she said, handing it back. "It's a lovely character reference." My hope faltered. "But legally?" I asked. She shook her head. "Legally, it's hearsay. It's not a legal document. The new owner's paperwork is what the judge will look at. I'm sorry, Mr. Gallagher, but this won't stop an eviction." The defeat was a physical blow. The bus ride home felt longer, the city grayer. The hope that had carried me through the morning was gone, replaced by a cold dread. The lawyer's words echoed in my head. What the judge will look at. My granddaughter, my own flesh and blood, was burying me in paperwork, using the very system I respected my whole life to brand me a deadbeat and throw me into the street. The betrayal now had a formal, legal structure. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, caught me in the hall. "Patrick," she whispered, handing me a plate of cookies. "My son is a paralegal." He looked up the building's sale records on mine. Her eyes were full of pity. "Your granddaughter, she didn't just inherit this place. The LLC that bought it is registered in her name. She bought out her cousins to get sole ownership. This wasn't something that happened to her, dear. She made it happen." The premeditation of it all stole my breath. At night, unable to sleep, I paced the worn carpet of my living room. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old pipes, was a voice from the past. I saw myself bringing my son home from the hospital, his tiny form wrapped in a blue blanket. I saw Rose, laughing as she decorated our first Christmas tree. This apartment wasn't just wood and plaster. It was the repository of my entire life, and Samantha was treating it like a line item on a spreadsheet. The ticking clock grew louder. Only 5 days until the court date. I received another letter, this one from Samantha's lawyer. It was an offer. If I vacated the apartment voluntarily within 48 hours, they would forgive a portion of the fictitious debt. It was a threat wrapped in legal jargon, a final turn of the screw designed to make me panic and run. They were just trying to evict me. They were trying to break my spirit completely. In a fit of despair and anger, I started cleaning out the hall closet, wanting to throw things away, to erase the memories before she could. My hand knocked against something solid. It was the old shoebox, a flimsy cardboard thing from a brand of boots that hadn't existed in 30 years. I pulled it down, the dust puffing up in a cloud that caught the dim light. Its weight felt heavier than I remembered, filled with the crushing burden of my past. I sat on the floor and lifted the lid. The scent of dry, aging paper filled the air. Inside were hundreds, maybe thousands, of slips of paper. 40 years of rent receipts, each one neatly dated and signed by Mr. Henderson. Bundles of canceled checks from before he started taking cash. It was a perfect, unbroken chain of my life's largest expense, a monument to my own reliability. And according to Samantha and her lawyer, it was all worthless junk. My fingers, stiff with age, traced Mr. Henderson's familiar, looping signature on a receipt from 1985. It felt like holding a ghost. This box was my history. It was proof of my honor. Staring at the neat stacks, a cold, hard anger began to replace my despair. This wasn't just junk. This was my life's ledger. And she had dismissed it without a second glance. A new feeling began to stir within me, something that had been dormant for years. The old union rep's righteous fury. I picked up a receipt from last year, just before the sale. It was on Mr. Henderson's standard, pre-printed stationery. Then I looked at one from 20 years ago. The signature was the same, but the form was different. And then I saw it. A tiny detail, printed in faint ink, at the bottom of every single receipt he had ever given me. A small, official-looking line of text. A single clause I had never bothered to read. My heart started to beat faster. It was a standard provision, something Mr. Henderson's lawyer probably added decades ago. But it was there. An acknowledgement of consistent long-term tenancy. Any attempt to evict for reasons other than material breach shall be considered tenant harassment. I read it again, then a third time. Harassment. That was a legal term. A word with teeth. A word that carried penalties. A flicker of an idea, a dangerous and beautiful strategy, began to form in my mind. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Samantha thought she was playing a simple game of eviction, a financial transaction. She had no idea she was stepping into a union negotiation with a man who spent 30 years fighting corporations over contract language. I carefully closed the shoebox, no longer a tomb of memories, but an arsenal. The next morning, I wasn't going to a legal aid clinic. I was taking my box of receipts to the local tenants' rights organization. The office of the city tenants union was in a dusty basement, smelling of old paper and stale coffee, a scent I knew well from my own union hall days. A young, fiercely energetic woman named Maria listened to my story without interruption, her eyes fixed on the shoebox I'd placed on the desk between us. She didn't dismiss it. She didn't call it junk. She saw it for what it was, ammunition. She carefully picked up one of the receipts, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Gallagher," Maria said, her voice low and intense. "This harassment clause is interesting, but it's the pattern that's damning." She laid out 10 receipts from different years. The city's Tenant Harassment Prevention Act is very clear, manufacturing a false claim of non-payment against a senior citizen to force them out of a rent-controlled apartment. That's not just a breach of contract. That's a predicate for a civil lawsuit, for triple damages. The words hung in the air. Triple damages. Suddenly the numbers changed. Samantha's claim of $48,712 wasn't just a debt I had to disprove. It was a weapon she had handed me. If her claim was fraudulent, she hadn't just tried to evict me. She had committed a specific, legally defined offense. Maria tapped a section of the city code on her computer screen. "The burden of proof will be on her to prove you didn't pay. With these receipts, that's impossible. But we can do better than just defending. We can countersue." The feeling that washed over me was dizzying. It wasn't just relief. It was power. The power of rules, of a system that, if you knew how to use it, could protect the little guy. The same system Samantha thought was her exclusive tool. "So, the eviction hearing next Friday," I began. Maria smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. "Friday is no longer about you defending yourself, Patrick. Friday is about you setting the terms of her surrender." That week, I lived in a strange state of calm. I received another call from Samantha's lawyer, the tone more insistent. "Mr. Gallagher, my client's offer expires tomorrow. This is your last chance to avoid a judgment against you." I listened patiently. the lawyer's threats buzzing like a harmless fly. "Thank you for the information," I said politely and hung up. The silence that followed in my apartment was no longer lonely. It was patient. It was the quiet before a storm. 2 days before the hearing, I saw Samantha in the lobby again. She was showing the apartment across the hall to a young couple, laughing and pointing out features. "And of course, we're renovating the entire floor soon," she said, loud enough for me to hear as I checked my mail. "Bringing the building up to modern standards." She glanced at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, as if my very presence was a stain on her bright, profitable future. At my lowest point, weeks earlier I had sat with the shoebox in my lap, feeling the weight of my life with Rose inside it. I remembered her gentle hands sorting through old photographs at our kitchen table. "You keep everything, Patrick," she'd say with a soft smile. "You never know what will be important one day." Back then, the memory was a painful reminder of my loss. Now, holding one of the crisp signed receipts, it felt like a message from her, a final piece of advice. Maria from the tenants' union had a plan, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. We would not present the evidence beforehand. We would not warn them. We would let Samantha and her lawyer walk into that courtroom on Friday morning, confident and arrogant, and present their case. And then we would dismantle it, piece by painful piece, not just as a defense, but as the foundation for our own legal assault. The element of surprise was everything. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window, looking down at the streetlights that had illuminated this same view for 40 years. I thought of Samantha as a little girl, so proud to hold my hand, so eager to hear my stories. What had happened to her? Where did this cold, calculating stranger come from? The betrayal wasn't just about the money or the apartment. It was the erasure of our shared history. The desecration of a love I thought was unconditional. Walking to the courthouse that Friday morning, the city felt different. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim being herded to the slaughter. I felt like a union man walking a picket line. My cause righteous, my evidence solid. I carried a simple briefcase. Inside, nestled amongst legal pads, was a single, plastic sleeve receipt from July 1998 and a certified copy of the city's tenant harassment code. Samantha and her lawyer were already at their table when I entered the courtroom. They looked confident, relaxed. She gave me a brief, dismissive nod, a gesture one might give to a piece of furniture. Her lawyer shuffled his papers, the picture of professional boredom. They saw a frail, 82-year-old man with no legal representation beyond a pro bono advocate. They had no idea they were about to face a lifetime of carefully documented truth. Her lawyer presented his case with brisk efficiency. He produced the building's sale documents, the new digital accounting ledger showing a glaring zero next to my name for years of payments, and the official eviction notice. "Your Honor, it's a straightforward case of non-payment. My client has graciously offered to forgive a portion of the arrears if Mr. Gallagher vacates, but he has refused. We are left with no choice." He sat down, a look of finality on his face. The judge, a weary-looking woman with sharp eyes, turned to me. "Mr. Gallagher, do you have a response to this claim?" I stood up slowly. "I do, Your Honor." From my briefcase, I produced the first exhibit. Not the shoebox, but a single notarized affidavit from Mr. Henderson's son, whom Maria had tracked down. It stated that his father's business practice was to collect my rent in cash, and that he considered me a tenant in perfect standing until the day he sold the building. Samantha's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. Hearsay." The judge waved him down. "It's a sworn statement, counsel. I'll allow it. It speaks to a pattern of conduct." A flicker of unease crossed the lawyer's face. Samantha, however, still looked bored, confident this was a minor, sentimental hurdle. She underestimated me. She underestimated her grandfather. And she profoundly underestimated Mr. Henderson's meticulous record-keeping. Then Maria stood. "Your Honor, we would now like to address the claim of $48,712 in arrears." She walked to the witness stand, not with a box, but with a single, enlarged photograph of a rent receipt. This is a receipt for payment of rent for this apartment from October 1983. It is signed by the previous owner, Mr. Henderson. We have 480 more just like it, one for every month of Mr. Gallagher's tenancy, creating an unbroken record of payment. A quiet gasp went through the small courtroom. Samantha's face, for the first time, lost its composure. The color drained from her cheeks as she stared at the screen, where the photo of the receipt was now displayed. Her lawyer was flipping through his files, his professional calm shattered, replaced by a frantic, panicked energy. This was not in his script. This was an impossibility he had never prepared for because his client told him it didn't exist. Maria wasn't finished. Furthermore, Your Honor, we'd like to draw your attention to a clause printed on every receipt issued by the prior landlord for the last 30 years. She zoomed in on the fine print at the bottom, a clause explicitly defining an eviction attempt under these circumstances as tenant harassment. The lawyer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was staring at the screen, at the tiny words that had just destroyed his entire case. Therefore, Your Honor, Maria's voice rang out, clear and cold. We are not here today to merely ask for this frivolous eviction to be dismissed. We are filing a countersuit against the plaintiff, Miss Samantha Gable and her LLC, under the City Tenant Harassment Prevention Act, for filing a fraudulent claim against a protected senior citizen. We are seeking the maximum allowable penalty, triple the damages she falsely claimed, a total of $146,136. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Samantha looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her eyes darted from the screen to her lawyer, to me. In them, I saw not remorse, but pure, unadulterated shock. The shoebox she had dismissed as dusty old junk had just been revealed as a perfectly preserved legal document, a 40-year-long paper trail that led directly to her own financial ruin. The trap had sprung. The judge peered over her glasses, first at the evidence on the screen, then at my granddaughter. Miss Gable, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, given this evidence, I suggest you and your counsel take a brief recess to consider your position. The court does not look kindly on what appears to be a bad faith eviction proceeding. Her words were a death sentence for their case, and everyone in the room knew it. That was Friday morning. The call came Friday evening, just as the smell of my neighbor's cooking began to fill the hall. It was Samantha's lawyer, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. He offered to drop the eviction immediately. He offered to formally apologize. He offered to cover my legal fees. Maria had told me to expect this. Do not accept, she had instructed. We hold all the cards now. We dictate the terms. The final insult came not from Samantha, but through her lawyer's increasingly desperate offers. On Saturday, he called again. My client is willing to offer you a cash settlement of $10,000 to drop the harassment countersuit. She's young. She was poorly advised. This could ruin her career before it begins. They were still trying to buy their way out, still treating justice like a transaction. They hadn't learned a thing. Maria advised me to let them fret. We didn't respond to their calls all weekend. I spent the time quietly in my apartment. The silence was peaceful now. The lavender scent of rose seemed stronger, a comforting presence. I had defended our castle. I had honored my promise to her. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months was finally gone, replaced by the simple, clean feeling of having been proven right. On Monday morning, Maria called Samantha's lawyer with our terms. They were not negotiable. 1. A formal written apology entered into the court record. 2. Full payment of the $146,136 civil penalty paid to the tenants' union. 3. An agreement where Samantha would legally transfer ownership of my apartment to me, free and clear, in exchange for me dropping the suit. It would become mine, forever. My castle, secured not by sentiment but by law. Her lawyer gulped. That's extortion. She'll never agree to sign away the property. Maria's voice was like flint. It's not extortion. It's a settlement. The alternative is a public trial, a judgment against her, and a story in every newspaper about the granddaughter who tried to cheat her own family, her reputation, or the deed to one apartment. She has 1 hour to decide. He called back in 20 minutes. Samantha had agreed to all terms, and that brought us back to the hallway. Not in the courtroom, but here, outside my door, where the humiliation began. Samantha wanted to do the signing here, quietly, away from the prying eyes of the court. She stood with her lawyer, the sane, slick manager beside her, though his smile was gone, replaced by a nervous pallor. She held a black pen and a sheaf of documents. The final act of our drama was to be staged in the exact spot of her initial triumph. The total arrears come to $48,712, Patrick, she had said here, her voice full of false authority. Now she spoke in a strained whisper. Grandpa, if you'll just sign the settlement agreement. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. They were fixed on the documents in her hand, the paper that would undo everything she had tried to do. The smell of my neighbor's cooking was the same, but this time it smelled like victory. I didn't say a word. I simply stood there, my hands folded calmly, just as I had before. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to endure the discomfort. Mrs. Gable's door was cracked open again, a silent witness to this very different scene. Samantha's composure finally broke. A tear traced a path down her cheek. Please, Grandpa, just sign it. Let this be over. Her plea was not for forgiveness, but for escape. I took the pen from her hand. Its plastic was cool against my skin. I scanned the top document. It was the settlement, formally withdrawing her eviction and my countersuit. Beneath it was the apology she had been compelled to write. I, Samantha Gable, admit to filing a wrongful and predatory eviction claim against my grandfather, Patrick Gallagher. Her signature was a tight, angry scrawl at the bottom. It was a permanent record of her greed. The last document was the most important, the deed transfer, the legal instrument that turned Apartment 4C, my home of 40 years, into my property. It was a lease termination of her ownership and the beginning of mine. All my life, I had paid rent to others. Now, because of her cruelty and my foresight, this place would finally, irrevocably, belong to me. A home bought not with money, but with a lifetime of integrity. She pushed the documents towards me on a clipboard, the same one the manager had held so smugly before. Just sign on the lines, and it's done, her lawyer muttered, his gaze fixed on the floor tiles. The power dynamic in the hallway had been completely inverted. They were the ones who were cornered. They were the ones desperate for my signature. The hunters had become the hunted, trapped by their own avarice and a shoebox full of receipts. I thought of the little girl I used to bounce on my knee in the living room just a few feet away. I remembered her whispered secrets and her fierce hugs. A part of me ached for that lost child, for the family that had been shattered. But the woman standing before me was a stranger, one who had looked at my life's home and saw only an asset to be liquidated. She had made her choice. Now I was making mine. I looked directly at Samantha, forcing her to meet my gaze. Her eyes were red-rimmed and full of a bitter, resentful shame. There was no love there. There was no remorse. There was only the sting of defeat. It wasn't just about the rent, Sammy, I said, my voice quiet but clear. It was never just about the rent. It was the only thing I had said to her directly through this whole final exchange. It was the only thing that needed to be said. She flinched, as if my words were a physical blow. Her lawyer cleared his throat impatiently. Mr. Gallagher, if you would please sign. He pointed to the highlighted line, eager to end this humiliating ordeal. They didn't want a lesson. They didn't want reconciliation. They just wanted a signature to stop the bleeding, to make the consequences of their actions disappear. But some things can't be erased. I uncapped the pen. The click was loud in the quiet hallway. I signed my name, Patrick Gallagher, on each line. My signature, once shaky with age and anxiety, was now firm and steady. With each stroke, I felt 40 years of tenancy fall away, replaced by the solid certainty of ownership. I wasn't a renter anymore. I wasn't a forgetful old man. I was the master of my own home, my own castle, just as Rose and I had always dreamed. After the final signature, I capped the pen and handed the entire clipboard back to her lawyer. He snatched it, his relief palpable. Samantha wouldn't look at me. She just stared at the scarred linoleum floor, a portrait of broken pride. The transaction was complete. She had traded her family's history, her grandfather's love, and a six-figure sum for the privilege of not having her name dragged through the mud in a public court. The lawyer and the manager turned and walked briskly toward the elevator, eager to be gone. Samantha hesitated for a moment. I thought she might say something, apologize, explain, rage, but she didn't. She just gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if to dislodge her bad memory, and then she turned and followed them, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, without a backward glance, and was gone. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, the scent of my neighbor's cooking filling the air. It was a good smell, a familiar smell. It was the smell of home. The eviction notice that had been taped to my door was gone, replaced by the faint, sticky outline of the tape that had held it there. A scar. I reached out and ran my fingers over it. Then I turned back to my apartment. Inside, the late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows just as it had on the day this all began. The dust motes still danced in the light. My worn leather armchair sat waiting. But everything felt different. The air was lighter. The silence was not empty, but full of peace. I walked over to a hall closet and looked up at the empty space on the shelf where the shoebox used to be. Its contents were now filed as evidence in a court record. Its job done. The box itself, the flimsy cardboard container that Samantha had called my junk, was back in the closet, empty. It was just a shoebox again. But for me, he would always be a symbol of the quiet, patient power of holding on to things, of keeping your records straight, of remembering. A testament to the fact that truth, no matter how old and dusty, eventually finds the light. I walked to the kitchen and put on the kettle for a cup of tea. The familiar whistle filled the apartment a few minutes later. I took my mug and sat in my armchair, the warm ceramic a comfort in my hands. I looked around the room, at the faded wallpaper Rose had picked out, at the scuffs on the floor where my son had learned to walk, at the mantelpiece crowded with photos of a family that now felt like a dream. There was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Gable from 4B, holding a small steaming casserole dish. "I thought you might not feel like cooking tonight, Patrick," she said, her eyes kind. She had seen the whole thing, from the first notice to the final, quiet surrender. "It's good to have you staying," she added, a simple statement that meant the world. "It wouldn't be the same building without you." I thanked her and took the dish. The warmth spread from the ceramic to my hands. Community. That was the other thing Samantha had tried to take from me, and the one thing she couldn't touch. The bonds forged over decades of shared hallways, borrowed cups of sugar, and quiet nods of greeting. She had tried to isolate me, to make me a lonely old man, but she had failed. Later that evening, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. My apartment was quiet, a sanctuary. I had the deed, the legal proof of my victory, sitting on the end table. But the real victory wasn't on paper. It was in the quiet dignity of this moment, in the knowledge that I had stood my ground, not with anger or violence, but with the simple, unassailable power of the truth. I picked up the phone, its weight familiar in my hand. I dialed the number for the City Tenants Union from memory. Maria answered on the second ring. "It's done," I said, my voice steady. "They signed everything." I could hear the smile in her voice as she congratulated me. I thanked her for her help, for believing in a dusty box of old paper. After I hung up, I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and simply sat, the master of my silent, peaceful castle.